Hello and welcome to the Advent IM podcast. I'm joined here today by Rowenna Fielding.
Hello.
Emma Philpott.
Hello.
And we're joined virtually by Nicola Whiting.
Hello.
I can see this is going to be a fun afternoon. There's been a lot of talk over the last couple of years about diversity. What does diversity actually mean? And it seems to have made its way into all sorts of portfolios and business documentation and great claims that organisations are making. And most recently, we've heard a lot of people talking about neurodiversity. But is neurodiversity really being taken to the heart of organisations, or is it something that they aspire to do? More importantly, why are most of the people talking about diversity, and in particularly neurodiversity, not actually diverse or neurodiverse? So what better way to have this topic discussed than to bring together people who actually know it from first-hand experience? And that's what we're going to be doing today. So I thought it might be useful maybe just to have a minute from each of our guests today just to explain what their connection with the topic is, and then we can have a little bit more of a discussion. So shall we start with Nicola first?
So I'm the CSO of Titania, and as part of that job, I spend a lot of time talking about diversity generally, because we believe diversity makes us stronger in thought. And because of that, I met a lot of neurodiverse people at an event in Shrivenham and found out after a diagnostic process that I'm autistic. So I'd spent 46 years of my life not knowing that. It explained a whole heap of stuff. It didn't change my thoughts on diversity, but it did change my understanding of myself and how I operate. So I've got a slightly different operating system to most people, which introduces some interesting benefits and challenges. But essentially, that's me, and I spend my time in terms of going and giving back to that community as being a spokesperson and being on the board of NeuroCyber for the UK, which helps steer governments' attitudes towards neurodiversity.
Okay, and Rowenna?
Very much like Nicola, I spent quite a long time in my life not knowing that I was autistic, having been raised in an environment where it was assumed that only boys could be because girls present very differently. In addition to being neurodiverse, I am also mixed race, female, not wholly heterosexual, and have a disability as well. So I am pretty much your rainbow coalition of diversity sitting here.
An employer's dream ticks all of the boxes in one person.
One person. Well, actually, I don't put those down on forms because I've not yet seen an organisation handle that data properly and in a way that's respectful of data protection rights and freedoms. So I don't tend to declare that in recruitment processes.
And Emma?
So I run something called the UK Cybersecurity Forum, and we do training up of unemployed neurodiverse people into cybersecurity. And the reason we do that is my daughter was diagnosed as being autistic when she was 15. And through her, I met an amazing charity called IASME in Worcester. And that's where people with Asperger's, adults with Asperger's, go and hang out. And it's an amazing place. There's about 60 adults that just go and hang out there on a Wednesday afternoon. And it's a really strange place for neurotypical people, because of course we are the minority there and it's a bizarre place. But the thing that really struck me was most of those people are unemployed, even though most of them are very, very clever and want to have jobs. So also knowing about the cybersecurity industry, I thought, well, this is ridiculous because a lot of neurodiverse people are particularly good at cybersecurity. So we got some money from the government and we started training unemployed neurodiverse people in cybersecurity. We've done 2 full cohorts now. So IASME, which is the commercial company that I run as well, we employed the whole first cohort in a new team to do a whole lot of new exciting stuff with us. And then the second cohort, there are still some people looking for work, but quite a lot of them have got jobs or going on to other education. And we're about to start the third cohort. So that's where I...
And how many people in a cohort?
It's about 15 in a cohort.
Wow.
We take on more. We have a dropout rate of about sort of 4 or 5 people each cohort, but about 15 who, got through both times. So, and we couldn't do it without Immersive Labs, who give us free access to their online training platform, and it's amazing. And we also have volunteers from across the cybersecurity industry that come to Worcester and give talks on their specialist subjects. So, although we arrange it, it's actually successful from everyone else's point of view.
So what strikes me from the introductions with both Rowenna and Nicola, you both were diagnosed, is that an okay word to use,
yep.
Diagnosed?
Fine by me.
Late on in life, is that typical? And if it is, why? What are the challenges? And is that getting better?
For women, yes, it is typical because autism in women presents, as I said, very differently to how it does in men. We're better at masking, so we're better at learning the social intricacies by rote and remembering where to apply them. We're also raised in our culture to be nice, accommodating, effacing, self-effacing. So, yeah, I thought I was just weird. Turns out I'm clinically weird.
I've read a lot about, and I even heard some Radio 4 pieces on it, about women in their 50s.
Yeah.
Just only getting a diagnosis now and not really having understood themselves for so many years. And not understanding their reactions, not understanding the career paths that they've ended up taking, and even the way they've raised their children, all sorts of things that have fallen into place for them as they've kind of hit this.
Not just women though. In our team, we've got 2 men who are both 49, and they only had a diagnosis a couple of years ago.
Oh wow!
So I think it's a lot of people. As people find out more about it, they think, hang on, that's me.
Yeah, totally.
But I think I'm not a huge fan of. We have a National Everything Week or a National Everything Day, don't we? But I think in some cases it's really, really worthwhile and really valuable. And certainly I think in the case of neurodiversity and just raising people's their sensitivity towards it as well. It's less about awareness and more about empathy and sensitivity and thoughtfulness and trying to find ways to enhance your communication with someone so you have a much richer relationship with them. There are ways that everybody needs to do that. And I think if an awareness week is the way to do it, then great.
And people say to me, "Oh, you don't come across as autistic," and that really annoys me because they say, "Yeah, exactly." If you meet when you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And I think they've got this idea in their heads that everyone autistic is like Rain Man, and also, not female. So when people say, "Oh, you don't come across as autistic," I kind of get a bit prickly about that because their idea of what autistic is just nonsense. And it's like they're saying, it's really ableist. It's like they're saying to me, "Oh, you're almost like one of us normal, proper, standard humans. You're not one of these, poor damaged creatures." And that really annoys me as well.
I've had people say that to me. "Oh, you don't seem autistic. You don't look autistic." Was one. And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'll try and appear more disabled for you." And they went, "That's rude." I'm like, "Fantastic, I'm already winning." People are known for their directness. So, yay, I'm achieving my goal. Now you feel I'm autistic.
I mean,
I'm rude.
Is that part of the challenge that we've got at the moment, that autism is seen as a disability rather than as a positive trait?
Well, if you look at the meaning disability...
No, it is a disability, Mike. And I want to be really clear about that because I think sometimes people say that they steer clear of that word because Unlike if you're in a real visible disability, where you have things that you have to manage because the world isn't set up for you, like being in a wheelchair and there's just too many stairs. That's really how a disability isn't a disimpairment, as far as I'm concerned. It means that the world isn't set up for the way that you operate.
Yes, sorry.
And so neurodiversity is a disability because the world isn't set up for neurodiverse people currently. Yeah. There's got to be a lot of awareness change.
It's the social model.
Sorry,
yes.
I didn't mean to imply that I thought it wasn't a disability. Far from it. What I was trying to also say is that because it's seen as a disability, it's not therefore seen as a positive trait.
Yeah, I think that could be true. Although I think a lot of people who maybe talk about the people that have got real gifts, like your Teslas of this world type people, or the people that are known for being neurodiverse. And neurodiversity, I know we've mentioned autism 3 times, it's not just about that. It's about dyspraxia, dyslexia, dyscalculia. Neurodiversity is just differences in thinking. I think it's quite challenging for people that maybe have more challenges, because it's almost like somebody's waiting for them to show the gift bit, and that isn't how it works either.
But it's, from an employer's point of view, it is not so much putting people in a box saying, oh, they're autistic, so they have to have reduced lights, and they might be too direct, and they are dyspraxic, so we have to make sure there's nothing they can fall over. That doesn't work. I think from an employer's point of view, rather than having neurodiverse staff and non-neurodiverse staff, you just have all staff. And when any staff member has a problem with something, they have to have some way of being able to raise it. Whether that is lighting, or whether that is not wanting to go to a staff party because they feel awkward there, or anything at all. And this includes depression and anxiety in general. And we have, within IASME, we have neurotypical staff who suffer with other things, and it's just as important for them to be able to say something about what they're finding difficult as it is from our neurodiverse staff. So, I think people can get into a habit of going, oh, well, we've just employed this neurodiverse person, and so we have to do this with them. And that's not the case. It's just all staff, when they're finding anything difficult, have to be able to say something. And then, most importantly, the employer has to take it seriously. And that's difficult. For me as a very busy employer, I have done this wrong in the last month. The team will tell you about this. When I've been really busy, someone's had a problem with, a light, and I've been like, oh, I'm just too busy to worry about that at the moment. Wrong. Because for that individual, that light was physical pain. And I think that's the mind shift of an employer. That when a staff member says, I can't get here, I'm going to be half an hour late every day, that's not them being lazy, maybe. It could be something massive in their life. So with all of this, either you or someone you delegate to and give power to has to have time to do something about it.
I think that raises a really interesting point in that in our kind of modern workplace, ever since the Industrial Revolution, actually, people are seen as units of economic production, and that is the only metric on which their value to the organisation, to society, wider society, is calculated. And until we challenge that mindset and say, well, there's more to life than making money, which is easy to say when you've got enough of it to be able to live. But also B, humanity is an incredibly complex and diverse and fascinating thing, and we shouldn't be trying to just kind of paint over each other and make each other all look the same and be treated the same. As you say, everyone is an individual, but unfortunately the environment we're in is set up so that is not a profitable course of approach. And so that's the biggest challenge. Employers don't want to spend money treating their employees, and I'm speaking very generally here, not saying all employees, but they don't want to spend money treating their employees like human beings, because you can't see an immediate causal link on the next quarter's balance sheet.
I'd like to hear what Nick's got to say about that, because you're an employer as well, aren't you?
I am, and actually we found that you definitely can see a causal link on our balance sheet. Everybody in our company, we definitely feel as a team. In fact, the staff word's banned, so when we get new leadership people into our team, we often have to have almost like a deprogramming session, particularly if they come from large corporates or educational or healthcare, where it's a more commonly used word. So we start with mindset. But essentially what we've seen is the better that you treat your people and the more individually you're able to treat them, and we have people analytics and metrics of how people think and lots of surveys and sit downs, the more retention rate you have and the better people tend to apply, and the more committed people become to continual improvement, because they then know, and we then know, that it's not about what can we get out of you, it's how can we work with you for you to make more money and to be happier, and for us to make more money and be happier too. So when you have that team attitude, it definitely shows in the bottom line, and we've measured it. And it's one of the talks that I used to do for Worcester Works Well, which is something the Chamber of Commerce does here with other organisations to try and get more of that mentality into the workplace. And I do agree with some of the comments earlier in terms of everybody is an individual, and we should look at that quite seriously, within reason. Obviously, some things just aren't feasible or possible.
Mm-hmm. I was talking to Rowenna earlier about labelling and labelling of either conditions or diagnoses, or what particular diversity you have, and that it's hard to strike a balance between sort of confirming, using it as a confirmation of bias against greater empathy, understanding, or sensitivity towards people, because you know and understand what it is that you're dealing with. I'd be interested to know what everyone thinks about that.
Well, like I said in our conversation earlier, labels are a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's very helpful to be able to have a name for a thing so that we all know what we're talking about. But on the other hand, the name for that thing becomes the thing in people's minds, and it takes the shape of their experience of that thing, and then that stops their minds being open to that thing looking slightly different somewhere else. So it's a way of constructing a useful box to put ideas in, but when you close the lid over that box and stop the ideas developing, it's actually a bad thing.
It's almost like an institutionalisation of it, isn't it? It's like when something becomes fixed in stone and it becomes an immutable thing, that it stops being helpful, it stops being enhancing, and it stops that development of the richer relationship and communication that you can have with people.
Is it more then about using that label to be able to understand an individual's particular needs and traits, rather than labelling them because of a particular condition? And I'm thinking here in terms of, it's interesting what Rowenna was saying about how we still treat people as a unit of currency, but there is a massive swell within the UK businesses still around how many hours people work rather than how productive they are, or whether they are doing the job that they need to do, regardless of how many hours they work. We have long recognised within Advent that some people are incredibly productive in the mornings. I'm not. I am very much a sloth in the morning. However, by about 8 o'clock in the evening, I'm just about hitting my stride. And when you let people work the way that best suits them, they are more productive, and like Nicola was saying, there is then a benefit to a financial benefit, a business benefit, and a sociological benefit to the organisation, because people are happier, they're more into the organisation, they feel more integrated and accepted, and they feel as though the employer has an understanding of them as a person, not just as another member of staff.
But I think you also have to be a little bit careful in terms of being an employer, that you have a duty of care as well. And I think this is where labels can sometimes help, because they can give indications of things that a certain person might have, you know. So they might have particular sensitivities to noise and light and stuff, they might not. But for example, quite a lot of our team who have Asperger's or autism will overwork. So they like to work at a different time of day, fine, work from home, but actually that's not always okay, because they will start working and they'll get really into it and they will just focus and work until they crash. And that's not okay either. So then we have to develop some way where they can work at home, but we don't let them overwork. And so, it becomes quite complicated. But once you've sorted it out, you have the perfect employee. But it just takes effort to sort it out in the first place. And I don't know if you're going to talk about this later, I think this is the problem that companies see when they employ neurodiverse staff. It takes more effort. You have to put more time and energy into it at the beginning. But then once it's going, there is a definite business benefit, and they tend not to leave. So it's the ability to put effort in at the beginning. But knowing that they are autistic means that we are aware that they might overwork. Not all of them, but some.
I was actually going to bring that up, actually, so maybe this is a useful point to do that. But I was at an event last week where an organisation was given a presentation on how diverse they were and how much effort they put into ensuring diversity within their organisation. And when I asked about neurodiversity, they were quite honest in saying it wasn't part of their key strategy, and that if they were honest, employing neurodiverse people was seen as hard work. It was seen as, it's going to take time, it's going to take effort, and actually for some of the line managers that's almost seen as too much hard work. So what can we do you think then to, across business, outside of the sector in which we work, the security and data protection sector, and within business as a whole, how do we raise the benefits of neurodiversity?
I think there's something else as well that needs to be considered, and that's something else I was talking to Rowenna about earlier, and that's how we recruit. The recruitment process for the average spectrum person is an absolute horror. So even once you've got that person into your... yes, of course, the issue then continues when you are supporting that person when they're in employment. But if you can't actually get them through the door, because the process to actually recruit that person, so standard recruitment process of one person sat in a brightly lit room facing 3 other people, answering questions one after another, is extremely intimidating to anyone, I think. But if you're on the spectrum, that is just an absolute horror story. So if you've gone through a process, say for instance, like one of the police competition things where they're trying to form an intervention to channel people away with certain skills, etc., if we talk specifically about cybersecurity, towards a more productive, useful, purpose-filled life with employment, they're going to be filled with aspiration, they're going to be filled with hope, they're going to be filled with all sorts of things, only to find that they're faced with this constant challenge of a recruitment process that is completely hostile to them. But it's something to think about.
I think part of it is business culture, and I'm like super massively thrilled to hear that there are organisations that are respectful of individuals as individuals and can show a benefit to that. But just in the wider culture, certainly in the UK, there's the whole idea that unless you are working, you are a waste of oxygen. Unless you are contributing to society in one very narrow and specific monetary way, then you're everyone's better off without you. And that's an attitude that's been fostered over the last decade or so, and it's very sad. But really, unless we tackle that in general community, in business culture, in our personal lives, in education, everywhere, really push the idea of human rights and human freedoms, not just how well you fit into this fairly rigid structure at the moment. I think probably most of the diversity efforts are going to be tokenism, because it's trying to do diversity in a diversity hostile environment that we as a society have created, and that's basic human nature. Fundamentally, we're mammals, and if you look at the animal kingdom, if one creature is different, then the others will turn on them and kill them. I like to think that we're evolving a little bit past that, but in many ways we're really not. So we need to have honest conversations about things like that, instead of pretending everything is good and making shiny marketing material out of it.
Mm-hmm. Nicola?
Sorry.
You were going to say something there?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that helps people that maybe aren't currently framed, in how to deal with these sort of things in business, is to make it about the everybody rather than the specific few. So when I talk about things that are good to do for neurodiverse people, let's say autistic people, so I've got direct experience of that. So for many autistic people, having a practical test as part of their job actually gives them an advantage, because they're very skilled. They may not come across well in an interview, say. But isn't that true for neurotypical people too? So if you're an employer and you wanted to be assured that you weren't just hiring the best person who could talk in a room, you were hiring the best skills as well for the post that you had, wouldn't a practical application test be beneficial to everybody? And then say you had the difference between a reflective thinker versus somebody that was really, hot at answering off the cuff, which may not be the right person for the role in terms of how they then thought in the job. Isn't it easier if everybody has the questions up front, so that reflective thinkers can be on an equal footing, which also happens to be quite good for neurodiverse people because it reduces the stress of what might I be asked. So quite often what we've found are the sort of things that benefit neurodiverse candidates, benefit us as a business. And I think when you align it with that, it's a lot easier for people to get their head around, because it's not just for a special set of people. It's actually a benefit. And in terms of light and noise and all those other things, there's got a well-known psychology experiment that happened with a white-footed mouse. And this white-footed mouse was put in a little box, and it's a nocturnal animal. It was given a little bar to push, and every time it pushed this bar, it made the light brighter. And it actually got to the point where it must have been unbearably uncomfortable for this mouse, but it kept pushing the bar because it wanted control of its own environment. And then they flipped it, and when it pushed the bar, it made it darker, and lo and behold, it carried on pushing the bar. And every human's like that. I don't know a single person, neurotypical or diverse, who doesn't like a little bit of say in what their environment looks like. It's just that for the neurodiverse person, it may be an essential rather than a like.
I've got a thought on the doing it for everybody rather than just a special group of people. And while I absolutely agree that's a magnificent approach and makes perfect sense, there are an awful lot of organisations that will only make provisions unless they are forced to by law. So if you are a neurodiverse person, a person with a physical disability, a person with a mental illness, the only way you can get, and this is probably more true of the big corporates than SMEs, but probably quite true of some very small businesses as well. The only way to get the adaptations, adjustments that you actually need in order to be able to function is to invoke that, the label, basically, to say this label is actually gives me certain legal rights that you are not allowed to violate. I think in a perfect world, doing what's good for everybody would be the norm, but human nature being what it is, I don't see that coming for an awfully long time.
Emma, you've been on the other side of this, trying to place neurodiverse people into employment. What's your experience been there?
So I think there are issues that do make it difficult. So you can say, the great stuff that Nick said, that's all good. But there are specific issues that are difficult. Sometimes neurodiverse people don't understand about hygiene. They don't understand about what's okay to wear in the workplace. They don't necessarily understand about what's okay to say. And we have, in all our cohort, we've had some people who say things that you just cannot say in our current society. And in a workplace, if they say things like that, you just can't. And so then it's a matter of having somebody who's going to be there to deal with it in terms of explaining to them why they can't say it and, reminding of things like that. Talking about hygiene, talking about what you can wear and what you can't wear. They're very difficult issues. So we actually have somebody who, that's her background, that's what she's good at, and that's what she's there for. Because I would find that really hard, but that's her job, and she does it really, really well. But it is difficult, and if you are going to employ people who, for us, most of the people we're employing have not had a job, ever. And they're in their sort of mid to late 20s. And there's often a reason why they haven't had a job. It doesn't mean to say that they're not great at the job, they're not really clever, but there's been barriers. And so as an employer, we have to address those barriers. And that can sometimes take effort and time. But having said that, we now have an amazing team with skills that we couldn't have found. So these people, if they weren't neurodiverse, would be some high-flying, amazing person that everyone would be trying to get, and we would have no chance. But because they have barriers in their life, and because we're willing to spend a little bit of extra time and effort to address those barriers, they come to little old us. And we have the most amazing team. So, it's a balance, and we find that we're very lucky because of it.
So are we doing enough within the education system itself to prepare these people for the workplace, to give them life skills and work-based skills to enable them to get that head start?
We're not giving neurotypical people those skills, let alone neurodiverse people.
Yeah, it is true.
We turned education into another metrics mill where we educate children in order for schools to be in a certain position on the league table in order to get funding, not for the outcome of what's best for the pupil. And we've set up, universities are becoming more like the American model, where they have to sell courses that bring in income rather than and put people on career paths rather than expanding the knowledge and understanding and awesomeness of humanity. So definitely not for anybody, I would say.
There's very little support that an adult can get who is neurodiverse. There's almost nothing out there. And we've had people travel 3 hours each way to go to our training because they say there is nothing else for them. So there is a massive lack of support, and something has to be done. So it's not just that people aren't helping them understand about workplaces and how to cope. There's literally nothing. Once you're over the age of the young people's education, then it's kind of a black hole.
Wow, that's just come as a real shock to me that there's that big a gap. That a 6 hour journey to go on a course, round trip just seems.
Well, I said to him I was really worried about him driving all that way to go on a course, and he said there is literally nothing else. So, yeah, just shows.
Nicola, what do you think we could be doing to pave the way into the workplace better for people with neurodiverse traits?
So I think that there's some fundamental changes that need to happen even before then in how we talk about neurodiversity, including how we talk about it clinically. So, I've done various courses online, and I've noticed in the communications between the various students how the difference between talking about autistic spectrum condition, which is a condition of being, it's just your state, versus autistic spectrum disorder changes the nature of the conversation. Because as soon as something becomes a disorder, it's something you want to fix. It's something that's broken. And this happens throughout our languaging. So some words become popular, like neurodiverse. People are like, oh, it's being really commonly used now. Maybe we should talk about it in a different way. And the words that people then use as the poster words, what was the divergent, neurodivergent. And I'm like, divergent from what? And the word is, well, you're divergent from being normal, aren't you? So the language that we use shapes how we then act and shapes the conversation. So I think one of those things is if government and the medical establishment and the diagnosis and the clinicians could start using words that don't imply we're broken and images that don't imply we're broken. So, for example, the puzzle piece. Most autistic people loathe the puzzle piece because it implies that there's a piece missing. And that conversation point where you open this whole topic up, Mike, is I think a lot of it is that there aren't neurodiverse people in the room saying, actually, the community feel like this. The community in general feel that this isn't a good way, that, this isn't how we want to represent ourselves. And there was one conversation I was having with somebody a few days ago, over the weekend, and they had been told by somebody who was neurotypical that they shouldn't use the language that they were using for themselves because they'd heard that it wasn't politically correct, because they were saying, I am autistic, and they're like, oh no, you should say with autism. But so the sort of thing that's happening, and it's quite crazy, but it just shows how far away we are in terms of being able to have proper conversations. We need to understand, well, exactly what is shaping these reactions.
This feels very much to me that we've been here before. That this is not. These people are different. Therefore, we need to somehow cure them, remold them, retrain them, reprogram them to be normal. This is not a new mentality. We've had this with so many different groups. We saw it in the dark days, with homosexuality, and people, even today in America, running programs where they can cure homosexuality. And I think you're right, Nicola, when we start to see this, not as a humanistic aspect, but as a disorder or as something that is wrong with somebody, that immediately sets a tone. And that's a tone I think that we absolutely in the business world have to not be going down.
There's a lot of bias. I mean, just listening to what Nicola was saying there, I was reminded of when I was having a conversation in the workplace with a colleague, and he referred to women as minorities.
Yes.
And I kind of pointed out that actually 51% of the world's population, if you round up, is women. So we were, in fact, the majority. And he could not get his head around this. And he wasn't a bad guy, but he had just been raised and programmed by his entire environment and social conditioning and everything to believe that the default of humanity was the middle-class white male, and that everything else was some kind of deviation from that. And I see the same culture coming up in other conversations about diversity, whether it's ethnicity or disability or socioeconomic background or everything. I think really what we need to do is question what we think normal is. And really examine our own biases and prejudices and encourage other people to examine theirs and not necessarily just dogpile on with a hate mob if they get it wrong, but encourage people, to look at their attitudes and their assumptions and think, well, actually, this is a statistical sample of one, therefore it's insignificant. I need to listen to other people and I need to accept that somebody else's normal is not my normal.
I'm just put to mind now when I went to school back in the 80s, left-handed people were made to sit on their hand because they were different, and actually the right was right-handed, and any people who were left-handed were somehow doing something wrong.
Well, when my dad was at school, he was beaten over the knuckles with a wooden ruler for being left-handed because the educators firmly believed at that time that left-handedness was associated with Satan, and only God's children could only be right-handed, and therefore he was inherently evil and needed to have the left-handedness beaten out of him.
Oh my God.
You know, what we're all saying here is that we need to re-examine the language and the societal concept of what normal is, because actually, isn't the truth that we're all a little bit abnormal, all a little bit different, all a little bit weird at times?
We're a whole constellation of overlapping.
But I think some people have it as a disability, so that some people are not able to easily live our life because of, you know, their whatever it is that they have, their difference means that they find it difficult to live the life that we have built at the moment. So I think that's when it becomes a difficulty, and that's when they need extra help.
Yeah, certainly in British culture, what is normal is what is the majority.
Yes.
But
it's
that
a
is not.
distribution curve, basically. So the people who form the majority of the bell have a much easier life in many ways than the fading aspects at either end, and that's really what we're talking about, because if that's what we've decided is normal, then it's good. Apart from that tiny narrow band that form the absolute middle of that section, anyone outside of that is going to have difficulty.
Well, the people in the tall part of the bell curve are therefore the ones that get to set the parameters for everybody else.
Yes.
So I think there's two parts to it. There's the immediate tactical issue of putting in place adaptations for people who need them in order to, you know, live a good life in the environment they're in. But there's also the strategic element of saying, well, you know, what kind of human beings do we want to be? And they're not mutually exclusive. They work totally in parallel. But unless you've got that kind of close focus and wide picture, I think that there'll be a struggle to make change.
What are the benefits, Nicola, of us getting this right then?
So when you look at some of the statistics, and I haven't got them for neurodiversity, I'm not even sure it's really been fully measured, although we have got quite a lot of measurements in terms of capability and efficiency and how fast things get done from businesses like Auticon, which is another organisation that employs pretty much solely people on the autism spectrum, and how their statistics stack up. It's quite amazing. But in terms of diversity in boardrooms and things like that, it's already been proven that when you increase your percentage of, say, women at the boardroom table, it actually has an impact on the bottom line. And investors are now starting to seek out that and making commitments to that because they've realised it's in their interest to do that. There's a big meeting during Infosec, actually, where the LEPs, the enterprise partnerships of the UK, are getting together to make a commitment that by 2020 there will be equal representation on the boards for women. And they're doing that not only because it's the right thing to do, but because there are significant benefits in thought. And I think one of the challenges is in growing a business, if you have groupthink, you're significantly disadvantaging yourself against your competitors in terms of, are you going to come up with the best ideas? Are you going to come up with the breadth of ideas you need to come up with a solution that's going to be competitive long-term in the marketplace? And the answer, when you look at some of the businesses that have been very large and then failed, is if you all look the same in the boardroom and you've all got the same background, it doesn't work very well. Brexit might be a good example of that, in that a lot of our MPs come from similar backgrounds and similar, expectations on life, and that's going awesomely. When diversity of thought is actually a really powerful thing.
Yeah.
So I think what it will look like is Star Trek, and I can't wait for it to happen, when we don't sort of mind about saying, oh, it's the autistic guy over there, or it's the black guy over there, or it's the woman over there, or it's the whatever it is, because it doesn't have a label that's negative associated with that. It's just a description in the same way as the pink shirted one. It doesn't matter anymore. And that's where I firmly believe humanity will eventually get. And the reason I believe that, because we often are biased to focus on negative things, is when we now look at, say, racial diversity, yes, it's got a long way to go, but we don't have Rosa Parks anymore needing to sit on a bus to prove that there's that level of human equality, at least in America. There are places in the world where that isn't the case. And there are places in the world where still women don't have the equality they need. So this isn't level across the planet. But I think we're moving forward. I think there is positive movement. It's just taking too long. So we need to change our language to help that. And I think the UK police force, I believe, said that at their current rate, it would take 100 years to get some level of diversity. So we start then looking at positive discrimination, whether that helps.
Well, I think that's been an absolutely amazing discussion this afternoon. I've certainly learned a lot. And I have to say it's given me a huge amount of food for thought as well. And I hope it has to all of our listeners of this podcast. I would just like to finish by saying that I, as a white, male, slightly middle class individual, am quite happy now to find myself actually in a minority group. So thank you, Rowenna. As a long-time member of a cybersecurity profession, I find myself continually surrounded by grey-haired, grey men in suits. So certainly I would welcome diversity in all its manners within my own profession. And I certainly know that organisations like Nicola's and those organisations that Emma is providing people to will benefit enormously from having a much more open and accepting way of taking on people and looking at business from a humanist perspective, not just from a bottom line. So all ends for me to do is to say thank you to all of our guests, to Nicola, Rowenna and Emma, for Ellie to helping set this up, for making sure that there was a more than adequate supply of pizza, at least for those of us in the room. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing this debate continue, but with people like yourselves at the heart of it. Thank you.
Thank you.